The University of Georgia signed another just unbelievable recruiting class in 2019. They're really on a roll in terms of recruiting, finishing in the top 3 over the last 3 or 4 years, whatever it's been, including the #1 class in 2018. So in today's video, I'm going to talk about which of the incoming freshmen in 2019 I think can have the biggest immediate impact on the University of Georgia this season. Hey, good morning, it's Uncle Lou here. Yeah, that's right, it's me, Uncle Lou, and I'm live for you on LouTube today, so thanks for watching. I really appreciate it also, and in addition to that as well, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I post college football videos almost every single day of the year, and sometimes they're even watchable. Yes, I'm a University of Georgia fan. I don't try to hide it or deny it, but I talk about all the teams in college football. I don't just cover the Georgia Bulldogs, but just to be honest, yeah, obviously, yes, I'm a Georgia Bulldogs fan. Give this video a thumbs up if you're excited for the start of the 2019 season. We're about 3 months away now. I'm going to talk today about which freshman on Georgia's team I think can have the biggest impact immediately in 2019. Now, when I look at true freshmen coming into a program, especially a program like Georgia, who you know, is considered one of the elite programs in college football right now, a roster that's loaded with talent, it's hard for a freshman to come in a situation like that and contribute in a meaningful way right away, because the talent ahead of them is just so great, right? And this isn't unique to Georgia. A lot of schools, are in this position, 5, 10, 15, whatever the number you want to look at of just elite programs right now whose rosters are loaded with, multiple top 5, top 10 recruiting classes. But there are certain situations, no matter how good of a team you already have, where a guy comes in as a true freshman and can really contribute in a meaningful way immediately. And when I'm trying to figure out which freshmen can come onto a team and compete right away for meaningful time and have an impact on the season, there's a few things I kind of look at and I say, okay, do we have any guys that fit any of these categories? Number one, you have a guy that is just so obviously talented and good that it just becomes impossible to keep him off the field, regardless of what the roster looks like or the depth chart looks like ahead of him in his particular position. So that's one thing I kind of look at. Number two, I look at a team's weaknesses, right? And this is sort of the obvious one. No matter what team you're a fan of, you can watch that team and then you can say, man, I really hope we recruit some high-level offensive linemen. We need help on the O-line. Or, man, we need some defensive backs. I really hope we go out and get some good defensive backs in next year's recruiting class, whatever the case may be. And so if that happens and you see a weakness and then the team goes out and signs a highly rated guy that fits that position, then obviously you start to think to yourself, well, maybe this guy can come in, play right away. So are there any freshmen coming in at the University of Georgia who fit into those categories? Well, we can start with the highest rated recruit Georgia signed, and depending on which recruiting service you look at, this guy was the #1 rated recruit in all of America coming out of high school last year. And of course, I'm talking about outside linebacker Nolan Smith. Some sites had Thibodeau rated higher than him, who of course ended up going to Oregon. But no matter where you looked, Thibodeau and Nolan Smith were the top rated recruits coming out of high school last year. Nolan Smith, outside linebacker, and he fits both of the categories I mentioned when I look at which freshmen I think can have impacts immediately in their first season. Number one, I do think he's just that good. I think it's going to be impossible to keep him off the field. Now, Georgia signed a couple of highly recruited outside guys last year in Brenton Cox and Adam Anderson, and they both played last year. Now, neither started a bunch of games, and in a lot of cases, they almost became like third down specialists, pass rush specialists, that kind of thing. They weren't, like every down players as a true freshman. I think Nolan Smith could be an every down player as a true freshman. I think he's a little bit better and a little bit more ready, in my opinion, coming out of high school than either of those two guys were. And I'm not knocking those two guys. Those two guys are going to be great. But the expectations for Nolan Smith, I believe, are a little bit higher than what they were for Brenton Cox and Adam Anderson. And I just don't think you're going to be able to keep him off the field. And it's also a position of need for the University of Georgia. Georgia's struggles sacking the quarterback last year are well documented on this channel, especially. and anywhere else you look, whether it be the mainstream stuff like ESPN or whatever, dead last in the SEC in sacks, something like 100 out of 130 in America rating wise in terms of sacking the quarterback. And I get the whole line about, well, the goal isn't just to sack the quarterback, it's to affect the quarterback. And that's kind of coach speak that you hear from Kirby Smart. Oh, well, depending on the quarterback and blah, 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 and, you can affect him. Well, the best way I know of to affect a quarterback is to put him on the ground, sack him. And that's something that Georgia struggled with last year in a major way. Now, when you watched Georgia play Alabama last year, if you had not watched Georgia play at all up into that game, and you only watched Georgia play Alabama, you would say, wow, Georgia's pass rush is unbelievable, because we had Tua running for his life. I don't know where that came from. I don't know where that pass rush came from in the Alabama game. I don't know if the defense was coasting the first 12 weeks of the year. I have no idea. But they need to play with that same sense of urgency every single week. Not just wait until what they consider to be a quote-unquote big game or quote-unquote game that matters, getting back to the whole Sugar Bowl thing there. But Georgia needs to improve in that area. And so I think a guy like Nolan Smith, the #1 rated high school recruit in America coming out, showing up at UGA in a position, in what I consider to be a position of need, I think this guy is going to see significant playing time in 2019. Will he start week 1 against Vanderbilt for the University of Georgia? I don't know. If I had to bet right now, I would say no. Kirby Smart, still a little bit on the conservative side. He's probably going to go with experience on the road. Yeah, yes, it's Vanderbilt, but it's an SEC road game. He's probably going to go with experience on the road there in week 1. But I do think Nolan Smith will play in that week 1 game against Vandy and every other game that Georgia plays in the 2019 season. And I think of all the guys Georgia signed on defense, he's probably the one that's most likely, in my mind, to have the biggest impact in the 2019 season. Now, I don't want anyone to take what I said about Nolan Smith as a slight against any of the other players that Georgia signed on defense. Georgia is loaded up on defense. Nakobe Dean at inside linebacker, probably the best inside linebacker we've signed since Roquan Smith, right? Tyreek Stevenson in the defensive backfield. A couple of defensive tackles that I'm looking to come in and contribute right away. Honestly, I could probably spend 20 minutes talking about every single player that Georgia signed and why I think they're going to be really, really good, either this year or at some point in the future. But try to keep this video, somewhat watchable and condensed. I'm going to sort of focus on Nolan Smith on the defensive side, and then I'll pick a guy on the offensive side. But plenty of talent in the 2019 class on defense for Georgia that I expect to see significant playing time in 2019. But for biggest impact, immediate impact as a true freshman, give me Nolan Smith. All right, switching over to the offensive side of the ball now, Georgia's 2019 recruiting class. Now, one of the highest rated players we signed was center Clay Webb out of the state of Alabama. We have Trey Hill at center. He's young. Trey Hill, a great blocker. He's got to work on snapping the ball, though. He had a couple of issues last year in a backup role at center with the snap. I think he'll get that worked out. It's hard for me to judge what I think Clay Webb will do this year. I do think Clay Webb is good enough to play. He may not play, though. Offensive line really isn't a position where you see a lot of guys rotate in and out. It's not like running back or even wide receiver or outside linebacker or something or defensive tackle where you see teams rotate guys in and out throughout the game. Consistency is huge amongst the offensive line. Is it possible Clay Webb plays in a lot of second halves this year if Georgia gets big leads over some of these teams? Yeah, of course, that's obviously possible. But in terms of Clay Webb having a true, meaningful impact for Georgia this year, I don't really see it happening. I think Kirby Smart and Georgia are going to go with Trey Hill at the center position. Now, if anything were to happen to Trey Hill, I do think Clay Webb would be the second choice there. And we have a long time to go. We still got summer camp, fall practice, and all that leading up to the start of the season. And anything can happen between now and then. And maybe Clay Webb comes in and he's just so good and obviously better than Trey Hill, and Kirby Smart decides to make the switch. But as of right now, I'm leaning toward it being Trey Hill. So I'm not going to go with Clay Webb, even though he's a very highly recruited player and someone we were excited to get at the University of Georgia, and somebody I think is going to have a great career at UGA. I'm not going to go in that direction. Getting back to sort of the 2 points that I made on who I choose in terms of having an impact, so good you can't keep them off the field, or positions of need. wide receiver position in need for the University of Georgia. Now, Georgia's got a ton of talent on the roster at the wide receiver position. The problem is none of it's proven, right? We lost our 3 starting wide receivers and our starting tight end from last year's team with Riley Ridley, Miko Hardman, Terry Godwin. Now, those were the 3 wide receivers. They left for the NFL, and tight end Isaac Nauta. So there's a ton of possibility. There's a giant opening, a giant hole at the wide receiver position at UGA right now. And if a freshman were to show up ready to go, I feel like he would be able to step in and have an impact. So did Georgia sign any wide receivers in the 2019 class that fit that category? Yes. In fact, they signed 3 of them. I am very, very high on the 3 wide receivers that Georgia signed on the top of its 2019 recruiting class, starting with, of course, George Pickens. This guy was a 5-star. Everybody wanted him. There was some question whether or not he would qualify immediately. Maybe he would have to go JUCO for a year and then transfer in. He did qualify. So while he didn't early enroll, he'll show up here in a few weeks for summer workouts and of course, fall camp leading into the season. George Pickens, in my mind, is the closest thing potential-wise to A.J. Green that Georgia has had since A.J. Green. And it's hard to believe that was, 11, 12 years ago when we signed A.J. Green. And we've been looking for the guy ever since. We've been looking for another one ever since. Now, they don't grow on trees. I get it. But I mentioned in the beginning, Georgia not really having a true number 1 wide receiver for a while. And a lot of that had to do with the size of these receivers we were recruiting. Not the case with George Pickens. This guy is 6'3", 6'4", almost 200 pounds. Prototypical, true number 1 wide receiver size. Something Uncle Lou has been looking for years from the University of Georgia. My expectations for George Pickens could not be any higher. They're almost to the point of me being delusional about it. I'll admit that. This is where sort of my homerism or me being a Georgia fan may override some of my common sense here. I have a lot of eggs in the George Pickens basket, and I will freely admit that even though everyone is high on George Pickens, I'm probably higher than the average person on George Pickens because I'm so thirsty for a true number 1 wide receiver at the University of Georgia, and I really think George Pickens can be that guy. Who else did we sign? Dominic Blaylock, another great wide receiver out of the state of Georgia. We missed on Hasselwood. Of course, he went to Oklahoma, but we did get Blaylock. He's got a lot of potential, too. In my opinion, Blaylock is good enough to play as a true freshman almost anywhere in America. We'll see if that translates into playing time on the field at UGA or not. And, of course, is it Maika Tung? If I'm pronouncing his name wrong, I apologize. I never pronounce names wrong on this channel ever. So if I'm pronouncing his name wrong, I'm sorry. But those 3 guys, in my mind, all have potential to be great wide receivers. But I'm most excited about George Pickens. And since I'm trying to pick just maybe one on offense and one on defense, I'm going to go with George Pickens here on the offensive side of the ball. I mentioned Georgia losing all those wide receivers, right, to the NFL. Now, of course, we do bring Holloman back, who's got some significant playing time, and Tyler Simmons, who has significant playing time. And I do think those 2 guys will be 2 of the starting wide receivers when the season starts in the end of August, right? You also have Demetrius Robertson. This has been a weird case here. The guy went to high school in Georgia out of the Savannah area, number 1 rated athlete coming out of high school in 2016, 2017, whatever it was. Had UGA in his top 5 or whatever, chose to go to the West Coast and play for UCLA, played for a year, had a great freshman season, got hurt early his sophomore season, sat out the rest of the year, transferred to UGA. Expectations were sky high last year. The guy couldn't get on the field. I think they threw the ball to him 2 or 3 times all season long. He dropped it every single time. He did have a really long touchdown run, which was technically a pass because it was a jet sweep, and they count that as a. Anyway, the point is he hardly saw the field, but he's back. He's got a year in the system now. I think most people expect that to be the starting 3 week 1 for the University of Georgia: Holloman, Simmons, and D-Rob, Demetrius Robertson. However, Georgia rotates a lot of receivers in and out, and in my mind, one of those true freshmen has got to step up and become at least the 4th option for Georgia after Holloman, Simmons, and Robertson. I'm looking for that person to be George Pickens. Now, there are other wide receivers on the team who are young and haven't played yet. Tommy Bush, Karis Jackson, Matt Landers. But these guys have yet to really show that they have what it takes to get significant playing time. Maybe one of the 3 freshmen coming in this year can be that guy. My money is going to be on George Pickens. Like I said, prototypical size, height, weight. He can do it all, catch, go up and grab the, the 50-50 balls. He runs good routes. He's got the speed. He's got it all. He's got all the potential in the world. Now, Kirby Smart has this whole you have to know how to block thing to play wide receiver. And I get that. We're a run-first team, and it's great when you can have your wide receivers on the edge carrying their blocks on the DBs downfield, and the running back can get past the first 2 levels, and the DBs are tied up, and that turns an 11-yard gain into an 81-yard gain, and that's great. But if it's 3rd and 11, let's put some wide receivers in the game who can catch the ball. Okay, you're not fooling anybody here. With receivers in the game because they can block on 3rd and 11. We need a true playmaker at the wide receiver position. In terms of true impact freshman for 2019, I'm going to go with George Pickens there. All right, per usual, I turned what could have been probably a 3 or 4 minute video into however long this video is because I tend to ramble in general. And when I'm talking about the University of Georgia, it becomes even worse. Like I said, I could probably do a 30-minute video on every single recruit Georgia signed and why I'm so high on them. It's just the way it is. But anyway, there it is. Impact freshman for the University of Georgia 2019. 1 on offense, 1 on defense. Obviously, there could be multiple impact players on both sides of the ball, but I try to keep this video under 9 hours long. I decided to go just 1 on each side. So there you have it. George Pickens on offense. Give me Nolan Smith on defense. Appreciate you guys watching. Have a great morning, and I'll see you again real soon.